But then the whispers grew louder. They followed her home, lingering in the corners of her bedroom, echoing in her ears even as she walked through the market. At times, they sounded like cries for help, mournful, ghostly wails that made her skin crawl. Other times, they hissed her name, reminding her of the terrible secret she carried. Mami Iyabo, confess, confess. She tried to block them out, telling herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew the spirits were angry. They wanted her to confess, to admit to the sins she had committed in her quest for success. But Mama Iyabo refused. She had come too far to turn back now. However, the spirits had other plans. Welcome once again to my channel. The title of the story is Mama Iyabo, the Evil Cook. The village of Eziukwu was no stranger to good food. But among all the delicacies, one name stood tall: Mama Iyabo. Her special food was known far and wide. Its taste, perfect texture, and the sense of satisfaction it brought to anyone who ate it. Market days in Eziukwu were filled with anticipation as people rushed to Mama Iyabo's store, eager to get their hands on her food before it is sold out, which it always did. What people didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that behind the savory flavor and the seemingly innocent smile of Mama Iyabo lay a very big secret. Her meals wasn't just food, it was an offering. It wasn't just popular, it was cost. Years ago, when Mama Iyabo was just a struggling woman trying to make ends meet, her food was average. She had tried everything: new spices, and even consulting local chefs, but nothing seemed to make her food stand out. It wasn't until she met a mysterious man named Okori that her fortunes began to change. It had been a rainy evening. The streets were muddy, and the marketplace was nearly deserted. Mama Iyabo was packing up her store when she noticed a tall man standing under a palm tree at the edge of the market. He was dressed in a long dark wrapper. His eyes, half hidden beneath the shadow of a wild-brimmed hat. He watched her. Mama Iyabo, he called out softly as he passed, his voice barely audible over the rain. She froze in her tracks. How did he know my name? Yes, she replied, clutching her basket tighter. Yes? I can help you, he said, stepping forward, his voice smoother now and more compelling. I can make you the most famous food seller in this town. Mama Iyabo blinked at him, taken aback. How did he know that she was struggling? Who was this strange man? But desperation has a way of clouding judgment. Mama Iyabo was tired of poverty, tired of struggling every day with nothing to show for it. So when Okore offered her a solution, she couldn't resist listening. All you need is a special ingredient, Okore whispered. Just a little water, but not just any water. It must come from a place of silence where the souls of the dead rest. Mama Iyabo's stomach churned at his words. She recoiled, stepping back. "You want me to use water from a mortuary?" she asked, her voice trembling. Okorie nodded slowly. "It's a small price to pay for the success you desire," he said. "Do you want to live like this forever? Or do you want to rise above everyone else and be remembered for generations?" His words hung in the air like a poison, seeping into her mind. Mama Iyabo hesitated, torn between her fear and her ambition. The man was strange, but there was something almost hypnotic in his tone. She felt herself being pulled towards his offer, despite the dark chill that ran down her spine. "Once you start, you cannot stop," Okorie warned. "The spirits will help you, but they will also watch you. They do not like betrayers." Mama Iyabo closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She could feel the weight of her empty pockets, the ache in her bones from years of hard work with no reward. And then she made her choice. The first time Mama Iyabo collected water from the mortuary, she did it in the dead of the night. Her hands shook as she carried the bottle, her heart pounding in her chest. She crept through the shadows, terrified of being caught. Her breath shallow as she entered the small room at the back of the mortuary. The air inside was heavy with the scent of formaldehyde and death. But Mama Iyabo forced herself to push through the fear. With trembling hands, she dipped her bottle into the large basin where the water for washing corpses were stored. The moment the water touched her skin, a strange sensation swept over her. A coldness that wasn't entirely physical, like the touch of something unseen. She shuddered, quickly covering the bottle and slipping back into the night. The next morning, she used the water in her food. She told herself it was just a small sacrifice, just a little bit of water. No one will ever know. But the results were immediate. The moment her first batch hit the market, people began to rave about it. Her store was crowded with customers, all clamoring for a taste of her food. Within weeks, she became the most sought-after seller in the entire village. Her food was unlike anything anyone had ever tasted, and people couldn't get enough. Success flooded her life like a river after a storm. She expanded her store, bought new clothes, and even began hiring other women to help her. Money poured in faster than she could count. The spirits had kept their promise, but the spirits had also started watching. For years, Mama Iyabo's business flourished. She continued her monthly trips to the mortuary, always at night and always in secret. And with each trip, her success grew. But so too did the whispers in her mind. It started with soft murmurs in the dead of night, barely audible at first. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to voices she couldn't quite make out. But as time passed, The whispers grew louder. They began to echo in the corners of her house, in the market, even in the streets. They followed her everywhere she went. They came in visions. Dark shapes would flicker in her vision. Shadows that vanished when she turned to look. She would catch glimpses of figures standing at the edge of her store, watching her with hollow eyes. But when she blinked, they were gone. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew the spirits were growing restless. They wanted more from her than just water. But Mama Iyabo was stubborn. She had worked too hard to give it all up now. She refused to listen to the whispers, refused to acknowledge the spirits, and for a while, she managed to carry on as if nothing was wrong. That is until Mr. Ikenna came into the picture. If at this point you have not hit the subscribe button, please kindly do. Turn off your notification bell so that you will always be informed each time I post new video. And don't forget to like, comment, and also share the video. And so Mr. Ikenna was a sharp man with an eye for details and a nose for secrets. He had the rumors swirling around Mama Iyabo. Rumors of her strange habits and her unexplained success. Being a school teacher, Mr. Ikenna was not the kind to jump to conclusions without proof. But he was also not the kind to let a good story go. One day, while arranging the burial of a distant relative, Mr. Ikenna found himself at the local mortuary. It was a quiet place, tucked away from the bustle of the village, and he didn't think much of it until he saw her. Mama Iyabo cloaked and hurried, sneaking around the back of the mortuary in the dead of the night. At first, he thought it was someone else, but the closer he got, the more certain he became. He watched from a distance as she took a large can from beneath her wrapper and dipped it into a container filled with water for washing cups. The sight sent a cold shiver down Mr. Ikenna's spine. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Could this really be the secret behind Mama Iyabo's famous food? His heart raced with excitement and fear. He knew he had stumbled upon something big, something dark. Instead of confronting her right there and then, Mr. Ikenna decided to bide his time. He began following her movements closely, tracking her every step she made. And the more he watched, the more certain he became that Mama Iyabo's success was not entirely her own. When the time was right, he approached her. "Good evening, Mama Iyabo," he said, one evening as she was closing her store. Mama Iyabo looked up, startled by his presence. She forced a smile, though there was a nervous flicker in her eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Ikenna," she replied. "How can I help you?" "I know your secret," he whispered, leaning in closer. Mama Iyabo froze, her blood running cold. What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to maintain her composure. "I saw you at the mortuary," Mr. Ikenna said. And he said again with his voice low, "I saw you at the mortuary." I know where your success comes from. Mama Iyabo's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to deny it, to brush him off, but the look in his eyes told her she knew the truth. There was no use of lying. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Ikenna leaned back with a predatory gleam in his eyes. "It's simple," he said. "You keep giving me a portion of your earnings every week, and your secret stays just that." Mama Iyabo's breath caught in her throat. She knew she had no choice. If Mr. Ikenna exposed her, she would lose everything. Her reputation, her wealth, even her freedom. There were whispers of people being accused of witchcraft for far less. But paying him, it felt like selling her soul once again. Like a continuation of the deal she had made with the spirit. Yet, she saw no other way out. "Fine, it's fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But if you tell anyone..." Mr. Ikenna interrupted. "Don't worry. Your secret is safe with me as long as you keep your own end of the bargain." And just like that, Mama Iyabo found herself under the thumb of yet another dark force. But little did she know, the spirits who had granted her success were growing impatient. They had tolerated her greed and ambition, but the arrival of Mr. Ikenna tipped the scales. Now, it wasn't just about the water, it was about betrayal. In the days that followed, Mama Iyabo began to notice strange occurrences around her store. At first, it was subtle. Small things like objects shifting in her shop and strange sounds echoing in the silence of the night. She would return in the morning to find her pots rearranged, her ingredients scattered in a way that defied explanation. It was as if someone or something was trying to get her attention. But then the whispers grew louder. They followed her home, lingering in the corners of her bedroom, echoing in her ears, even as she walked through the market. At times, they sounded like cries for help, mournful, ghostly wails that made her skin crawl. Other times, they hissed her name, reminding her of the terrible secret she carried. "Mama Iyabo, confess, confess." She tried to block them out, telling herself it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew the spirits were angry. They wanted her to confess, to admit to the sins she had committed in her quest for success. But Mama Iyabo refused. She had come too far to turn back now. However, the spirits had other plans. One night, as she was preparing to sleep, Mama Iyabo noticed a faint light coming from the corner of her room. At first, she thought it was a candle flickering. But when she looked closer, she realized it wasn't just a light. It was a figure, pale and translucent, like a shadow made of mist. The figure stood still, staring at her with hollow and empty eyes. Mama Iyabo's heart raced in her chest as she backed away from the apparition, her legs trembling beneath her. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The ghostly figure took a step closer, and then another, his gaze never leaving hers. "Confess!" the figure whispered. his voice hollow and cold. Confess. Mama Iyabo squeezed her eyes shut, willing the figure to disappear. When she opened them again, the room was empty. The figure was gone. But the damage had been done, and the message passed across. Over the next few weeks, the hauntings became more frequent and more aggressive. Mama Iyabo would wake up in the middle of the night to find ghostly figures standing at the foot of her bed, watching her with their hollow eyes. During the day, she would hear whispers in the market, even when no one was around. She started seeing strange marks on the walls of her shop, dark ominous symbols that she couldn't understand. Her health began to deteriorate. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't focus. She couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of dread that hung over her like a shadow. The spirits were closing in on her, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they demanded payment for the power they had given her. But still, she refused to confess. Mr. Ikenna, oblivious to the torments Mama Iyabo was enduring, continued to demand his weekly payment. He relished to his newfound wealth. He had no idea that the spirits were watching him too, and that they were not pleased with his interference. It wasn't until strange things started happening to him as well that he began to realize the gravity of what he had gotten himself into. One evening, after collecting his payment from Mama Iyabo, Mr. Ikenna returned home to find his house in disarray. His books were scattered across the floor, and his furniture had been overturned. At first, he thought it was a burglary, but nothing of value had been taken. It was as if someone had ransacked his home. Then came the voices. Late at night, as Mr. Ikenna lay in bed, he would hear faint whispers in the darkness. At first, he dismissed them as the wind, but as the night went on, the voices grew louder and more insistent. Ikenna, Ikenna, you cannot escape. Ikenna, you cannot escape. He will wake up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to brush it off as nightmares, but deep down, he knew there was something more to it. The spirits were not pleased with him, and they were making their presence known. In the village, rumors began to whirl about Mama Iyabo. People noticed the change in her appearance. Her once vibrant face had grown pale, her eyes hollow and haunted. Some whispered that she had been cursed, while others believed she was being tormented by spirits for some unknown sin. The whispers grew louder when strange things started happening in the market. Pots and pans would fall off shelves with no explanation, and the air around Mama Iyabo's store grew cold and heavy, as if the very space was being haunted. Some customers claimed to have seen ghostly figures lingering near her shop, and soon people began avoiding her store altogether. Business started going down, and Mama Iyabo found herself alone in the market, surrounded by the ghosts of her past. Desperate, she turned to the local priest for help. She told him everything about the spirits, the water from the mortuary, and the terrible price she had paid for her success. The priest listened in silence, his face grave as he absorbed her story. You have made a pact with forces beyond your control, the priest said finally. These spirits will not rest until you confess and seek redemption. But I have confessed, Mama Iyabo whispered, her voice trembling. I will lose everything. You have already lost everything, the priest replied gently. Now you must find peace for your soul before it is too late. But Mama Iyabo wasn't ready for the redemption. She wasn't ready to face the consequences of her actions by confessing. Instead, she continued to hide, hoping that the spirits will eventually leave her alone. But the spirits will not be ignored. As the hauntings grew more intense, Mama Iyabo's mental state began to unravel. She started seeing the ghosts everywhere. At her store, in her home, even in her dreams. They whispered to her, taunted her, and urged her to confess. But no matter how much she tried to ignore them, they never left. One day, while walking through the market, she saw a group of women from the church standing near her store. They were talking in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally glancing in her direction. Mama Iyabo felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She knew they were talking about her, about the strange things that had been happening around her. As she passed them, one of the women stopped her. Mama Iyabo, the woman said softly, her voice filled with concern. We have been praying for you. Mama Iyabo forced a smile, though her heart was racing. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked at her for a long moment, her eyes filled with something like pity. If you ever need help, we are here, she said gently. Mama Iyabo nodded quickly and hurried away, her mind racing. The prayers the women were making was making her uncomfortable. She could feel the power of the women's faith pressing down on her, and it was starting to affect the spirits. The hauntings became more violent after that, as if the spirits were angry at the interference of the church. It wasn't long before the women from the church decided to take the matters into their hands. They gathered outside Mama Iyabo's store one morning, singing hymns and praying loudly. The air grew thick with tension as their voices rose in unison, calling on God to cleanse the market of any evil presence. Mama Iyabo watched from a distance, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the spirit swirling around her, growing more agitated by the prayers. Her hands trembled as she clutched her apron, trying to keep herself calm. But it was no use. As the prayers intensified, Mama Iyabo began to shake uncontrollably. She could feel the spirits pressing down on her, their anger reaching a fever pitch. She tried to hold it together, but the pressure was too much. With a scream, she fell to the ground, in pain as the spirits overtook her body. The women from the church rushed to her side, their voices filled with urgency as they continued to pray. Confess, one of the women shouted, her voice ringing out above the chaos. Confess your sins. Mama Iyabo's body convulsed violently on the dusty ground as the group of women encircled her, their prayers growing louder and more fervent. The air around them was thick with spiritual tension. An unseen war was being waged, and Mama Iyabo was its battleground. She could feel the spirits clawing at her, their cold fingers wrapping around her throat, choking the last remnant of her resistance out of her. Confess, the women shouted in unison, their voices a powerful crescendo that echoed through the market square. Mama Iyabo's eyes rolled back into her head as her mouth opened in a soundless scream. Her lips moved, but the words refused to come out. She felt as though she was being torn apart from the inside, the weight of the spirits crushing her under its force. But still, her pride and fear held her tongue in place. Then something strange happened. As the church women pressed on with their prayers, a strange wind whipped through the market. The once stagnant air began to swirl violently around them. Store canopies flapped furiously, and dust rose, choking cloud. It was as though the village itself was coming alive, reacting to the battle between light and darkness. The temperature dropped suddenly, causing the women to shiver as they prayed more. The ground beneath them trembled, as if the very earth was rejecting what was taking place. It was as though the spirits themselves had risen up, refusing to be silenced by mere human prayers. One of the women, Mama Ifoma, a well-known prophetess in the village, stepped forward with authority. Her eyes blazed with spiritual fire as she lifted her hands to the heavens. Spirits of darkness, she commanded, we bind you in the name of Jesus Christ. You will release this woman and flee from this place. Mama Iyabo's body jerked violently, and a loud scream escaped her lips, louder and more animalistic than any sound a human should make. It echoed across the market square, causing people to stop in their tracks, their faces pale with shock and fear. Her body stilled for a moment, and then she began to speak. Not with her own voice, but with something else. Her lips moved, but the words that spilled forth were foreign accents. Leave us, the voice hissed from within her, its tone dripping with malice. She is ours. She is ours. The crowd that had gathered around the scene gasped. They could feel the weight of those words, the palpable presence of something far more malevolent than anyone had imagined. Some of them fled, but many stayed. They were witnessing something that defied explanation, something straight out of the darkest corners of their ancestors' stories. Mama Ifoma was not moved. She stepped even closer. Her prayers became louder. The other women joined her, raising their voices in spiritual choruses, calling down divine intervention. But the spirit will not let go so easily. As the prayers intensified, a thick dark mist began to swell around Mama Iyabo's body. It coiled like a living smoke, forming shapes, faces, twisted in agony and rage that seemed to float just above the ground. Mama Iyabo gasped as the spirit tightened its grip on her soul. She had thought that her path with the spirits would bring her nothing but prosperity. She had not counted on them demanding so much from her. Her sanity, her life, and the souls of others. I can't, she cried, her voice breaking through the demonic influence for just a moment. I can't confess. They won't let me. She's bound, someone in the crowd shouted, terror creeping into their voice. The women pressed harder, prayed harder. Release her, she demanded. She belongs to the living and not the dead. The dark mist recoiled at Mama Ifoma's words, but it didn't vanish instead. It seemed to wrap itself more tightly around Mama Iyabo, pulling her deeper into its clutches. They had been betrayed once by Mama Iyabo, and now they were being betrayed again. They will not let her go without exerting their own pound of flesh. Mama Iyabo's eyes fluttered. Visions of the dead began to swim before her eyes. Faces of those who had passed through the mortuary where she had drawn the cursed water. They were accusing her, pointing at her with their skeletal fingers, their eyes burning with anger and sorrow. "You fed them our death," one spirit hissed. Its face decayed and twisted with rot. "You offered them our pain in every bite." "No!" Mama Iyabo screamed. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to." But the spirits will not be appeased. They grew louder, more furious, their voices blending together in despair. The prophetess knew they were losing her. Desperate, she raised her hands towards the sky and shouted, "Holy Ghost fire! Burn away the darkness and set this woman free." A flash of light burst from the heavens. The spirits had been driven back, at least for now. But Mama Iyabo lay on the ground, trembling and broken. The women helped her to her feet. Mama Iyabo's eyes were wild, as if she was still seeing spirits, even though they had been banished. Her body shook uncontrollably, her mind teetering on the edge of madness. She stammered. Her voice barely could be heard. "I used the water. I used it. I didn't know. I didn't think this would happen. I used the water from the mortuary." Her confession came in broken, halting sobs. The crowd watched in silence. Mama Iyabo crumbled before them. Her sin lay bare for all to see. And then, without warning, she started laughing uncontrollably. She began to mutter under her breath, words that no one could understand. The women stepped back, watching in horror, as Mama Iyabo's mind shattered completely after the confession. She tore her wrapper, throwing it to the ground, and began to run through the market, screaming and laughing hysterically. The crowd parted before her, too terrified to intervene. They watched as Mama Iyabo disappeared down the narrow village of Eziokwu, her mad laughter echoing in the distance. And then she was gone. Days passed and Mama Iyabo was nowhere to be found. Some said she had fled the village, driven mad by the spirit that haunted her. Others claimed they had seen her wandering in the outskirts of Eziokwu, muttering to herself and scratching at the ground like a wild animal. But the truth was that no one knew for certain what had become of her. The market resumed its usual bustle, and the memory of Mama Iyabo's fall slowly faded into the background. The villagers whispered about her, but no one dared to speak her name too loudly, for fear that the spirits might hear and come looking for a new victim. Mr. Ikenna too vanished soon after Mama Iyabo's disappearance. Some said he had been taken by the spirits, while others believed he had fled in fear of what might happen to him if he stayed. Either way, the village breathed a collective sigh of relief. No one could forget the day Mama Iyabo was exposed. Moral lesson. Number 1, the price of greed. Mama Iyabo's downfall served as a reminder that greed and the pursuit of success at any cost can have consequences. What seemed like a shortcut to prosperity may lead to unimaginable suffering. The story also emphasized the importance of confessing one's sin before they consume you. Mama Iyabo's refusal to confess her wrongdoings ultimately led to her destruction. Only by confronting our mistakes can we seek redemption. And lastly, Mr. Ikenna's faith shows that being complicit in someone else's wrongdoing is just as dangerous as committing the crime yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If at this point you are yet to subscribe, what are you waiting for? Please do. It will help my channel to grow. And also, please don't forget to like, share, and comment. Also, hit the notification bell so that anytime I post new videos, you will be among the first to be notified. And to my returning subscribers, what can I do without you? You guys are simply amazing. Thank you so much for always stopping by to watch my videos and also to engage. You are amazing. I love you all. See you in my next one. Bye.